She was just a janitor. Her daughter was freezing on the steps. He was a billionaire on his way to lunch, until one question changed all their lives forever. No one knew her name. No one saw the child. But the man in the expensive coat stopped and whispered, "Would you like some lunch?" The wind that day cut like glass through the narrow streets of Manhattan. It was the kind of winter cold that didn't just press against your skin. It got in, underneath your coat, behind your collar, into your bones. Evan Blake didn't flinch. His long, dark wool coat fell perfectly around him, tailored to his frame. The collar turned slightly against the chill. He walked with purpose, every step sharp and certain, shoes tapping rhythmically against the sidewalk. Behind him trailed two associates, each glued to their phones, talking numbers and deals and upcoming board votes. Evan wasn't listening. His eyes were locked on the revolving doors ahead. Lunch. He was already 15 minutes late for a business lunch with two executives from a European AI firm. High profile, multi-million-dollar potential. Normally, he'd be focused, already rehearsing his opening pitch in his mind. But today, something else caught his attention. It was the stillness. In the chaos of lunch-hour foot traffic, she stood perfectly still. A small girl, no more than 8 years old, sat on the edge of the wide granite steps outside the building. She was wearing an old faded blue coat that looked like it once belonged to someone else, someone bigger. It hung off her shoulders awkwardly. Her thin hands were tucked into the sleeves, and she was trembling, her legs drawn up close to her chest. No gloves, no scarf, no parents in sight. People walked past her without slowing down. A few glanced her way, most didn't. She wasn't crying, wasn't begging, wasn't holding out a cup or cardboard sign. She was just there, still, small, cold, waiting. Evan slowed his pace, something tightening in his chest. He had seen poverty. He had funded shelters, signed off on charity grants, shaken hands at galas where donors toasted their generosity with vintage champagne. But this was different. This was real. He stopped walking. One of his associates turned. "Mr. Blake?" Evan ignored him and stepped away from the entrance, toward the girl. He lowered himself slowly so he wouldn't startle her. Up close, he saw just how thin she was. Her cheeks were red from the wind, her lips slightly cracked. "Hey," he said softly. "Are you okay?" She looked up, her eyes big and brown, sharp despite the cold. She didn't speak right away. She just nodded, a small, cautious gesture. "Are you waiting for someone?" She looked toward the building. "My mom works in there," she said finally. Her voice was hoarse, quiet. "She's cleaning." Evan followed her gaze and understood. One of the overnight janitorial crews must have brought their child along. No sitter, no help, just doing what they had to. He looked back at her. "Do you want to come inside where it's warm?" She shook her head. "She told me to stay here." Of course she did, Evan thought. If security saw a child roaming the halls, her job would be at risk. Maybe everything would be. He paused, glanced at his watch. The meeting could wait. "Have you eaten today?" he asked. The girl shrugged. "A little." That answer broke something in him. He stood up and offered a hand. "Would you like to have lunch with me?" She stared at his hand for a second, then at his face, then back again. He was a stranger, a sharply dressed man with a deep voice and serious eyes. But there was something kind in his expression. Gentle, and she was hungry. She reached out and took his hand. Evan turned back to his confused associates. "Reschedule the lunch. I have a more important meeting." And with that, he and the girl walked side by side across the street into a quiet bistro with white tablecloths and warm lighting. Heads turned as they entered, but Evan didn't care. He was no longer thinking about quarterly targets or investor strategy. He was thinking about how a little girl, sitting silently in the cold, had made the whole world stop spinning for just a moment. And somehow, he already knew, that moment wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. The warmth inside the bistro felt like another world. The moment the glass door closed behind them, the wind and noise of Manhattan disappeared, muffled into silence. Soft jazz played over the speakers. The air smelled like garlic and rosemary, and chandeliers spilled warm amber light across polished floors. Evan kept his hand gently on the girl's back as he guided her through the dining room. People turned to look. Not at him, but at her. A girl in a tattered blue coat, cheeks still flushed from the cold, walking beside a man in a tailored suit whose face had been on the cover of Fortune twice this year. Some guests whispered. Others just stared. Evan didn't notice. Or maybe he didn't care. He chose a table in the back corner, away from the windows, somewhere quiet. A waiter approached, flustered. "Mr. Blake, welcome. Would you like your usual table?" "This is perfect," Evan said. "Could we get some hot tea for my guest? Maybe something with honey?" The waiter nodded and scurried off. The girl sat down carefully, hands in her lap. Her legs didn't reach the floor. Evan could see her trying to be small, as if afraid she might do something wrong just by breathing too loud. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Lily." "Lily," he repeated with a soft smile. "That's a beautiful name." She shrugged, as if unsure whether to accept the compliment. "I'm Evan." She looked at him then, really looked, with those big brown eyes that saw more than they should. The silence stretched for a moment. "Are you rich?" she asked without accusation. "Just curiosity." Evan was slightly taken aback, then chuckled. "I guess so. Why do you ask?" "You wear clothes like the people in the movies, and you smell like a store." That made him laugh. Not at her, but in the way that someone laughs when they've forgotten how honesty can feel refreshing. The waiter returned with tea and a children's menu, though Lily didn't seem interested in crayons or coloring. She watched the menu like it was written in another language. Maybe it was. The waiter leaned down and spoke to her as if she were royalty. "Would you like some soup? Maybe mac and cheese? Or a grilled cheese sandwich?" She glanced at Evan. "You can order whatever you like," he told her. She whispered, "Soup. Tomato or chicken?" "Tomato." Evan ordered the same with a side of bread and 2 waters. As the waiter left, Lily stared at the linen napkin in front of her, running her fingers over the soft fabric like she wasn't sure it was real. "How old are you, Lily?" "8, almost 9. "And your mom works in my building?" She nodded. "She cleans floors and bathrooms, sometimes offices if no one's there." "That's hard work." "She's really good at it." "I believe you." The soup arrived in steaming white bowls with basil leaves floating on top. Lily hesitated, looking at the spoon, then at Evan. "Go ahead," he said with a warm smile. "Eat as much as you want." She picked up the spoon and took a small, cautious bite. Her eyes widened. Then another bite, quicker. Then another. Evan watched her, his heart twisting. She wasn't wolfing the food down, but there was hunger in every movement. Hunger restrained by manners someone had clearly taught her. Be quiet, be polite, be invisible. He took a few bites of his own, then asked, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" She looked up at him. "No one's ever asked me that before." He blinked. "Really?" She shook her head, chewing thoughtfully. "I don't know. Maybe a teacher. That's a good job. I help my mom teach English to the ladies she works with. She used to be a teacher before." That caught his attention. "Your mom used to teach?" "She was something called a translator. She talked in other languages, in offices, big ones. She says it's dangerous now, though." Evan sat back, slowly processing the words. "And your dad?" There was a pause. "He's gone." "I'm sorry." Lily looked down at her bowl. "It's okay. I don't remember much." The air around the table shifted, not darker, just quieter, more fragile. Evan knew he was treading into a life that wasn't his, into stories written in pain and survival. But he also knew that turning away now, pretending this was just a nice gesture and walking out, would feel like betrayal. They finished lunch in a peaceful silence. Lily sipped the last of her tea with both hands wrapped around the cup. She looked warmer, less pale, more present. When they stood to leave, Evan reached into his coat pocket and gently handed her a wrapped chocolate from the counter. "For later." She looked at it like it was a jewel. "Thank you." As they stepped back outside, the cold wind greeted them again, but it didn't feel as brutal. Lily paused on the steps and pointed to the glass building across the street. "She's almost done." Evan looked. Janitors were cleaning the lobby. One of them, a tall woman with dark hair pulled into a low braid, turned just in time to see them standing there. Her eyes locked on Lily. Her expression changed instantly. Worry, fear. She came rushing out within seconds, apron still tied, gloves shoved into her pocket. "Lily! I'm okay, Mama, the girl said quickly. He just gave me soup. The woman stopped in front of Evan, breathless. She had the kind of beauty that caught people off guard. Not polished or made up, but sharp, clear, vivid. Her blue eyes were filled with alarm, but behind them was intelligence and exhaustion. I'm sorry, she said. She wasn't supposed to go anywhere. She didn't. I found her sitting on the steps, Evan said calmly. She looked cold. That's all. The woman glanced at him again. Recognition flickered. Thank you, she said more softly now. But oh no, we're fine. I don't doubt that, Evan replied. She's a remarkable kid. He turned to Lily and offered his hand again. She took it for just a second, then let go and stepped back toward her mother. Evan looked at both of them, memorizing the moment. The woman in the janitor's uniform, standing tall despite everything, and the little girl in the blue coat who had unknowingly dismantled the walls around his heart. He nodded once. Take care. And then he walked away, coat whipping behind him, the taste of tomato soup lingering on his tongue, and something else he couldn't name burning quietly in his chest. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Evan Blake walked through the revolving doors of his office tower, but something was different. He didn't feel like himself. His feet moved out of habit, but his thoughts were scattered, trailing behind him like loose threads. The brief interaction with Lily and her mother should have been a fleeting moment, an unexpected blip in his otherwise tightly managed day. Instead, it lingered in his chest like a question that refused to go away. He took the elevator alone, a rare thing for someone constantly surrounded by people. He declined 2 calls from his assistant and canceled his afternoon meeting with the expansion team. He needed space, something unfamiliar for a man whose life was structured down to the minute. Back in his corner office, sunlight poured through the tall windows, illuminating sleek furniture and minimalist artwork. But for the first time, it all looked strangely hollow. He stood by the glass, arms crossed, watching the street below. His eyes searched without meaning to, for a flash of blue fabric, a small figure crossing the pavement. But they were gone. His thoughts returned to the moment on the restaurant steps. Hannah's face, that sharp, unmistakable blend of alarm, strength, and quiet pride. She hadn't asked for anything. She hadn't thanked him like someone desperate. She had looked him straight in the eye, told him they were fine, and pulled her daughter gently but firmly back into her orbit. He had seen that look before, not in the corporate world, but in war zones, disaster sites, refugee camps. The kind of look that says, I've been through worse. I will not break here. He didn't even know her name yet, just Lily's mom. But she had left an imprint on him far deeper than she could have known. Evan sat at his desk, pulled up the building's internal staff records, and scrolled through the subcontractor lists. It wasn't something a CEO normally did, but he wasn't acting like a CEO today. He filtered by janitorial staff. Most names were coded under a vendor service. It took longer than he expected to find her. Hannah Reeves, there it was. Contracted part-time, rotating evening shifts, hired through a third-party facilities vendor. No formal employee profile, no direct corporate email, no benefits file, just a name and a badge number buried deep in the system. Evans stared at it for a long moment. Then he did something impulsive. He opened the payroll system and flagged her ID for inclusion in the Internal Assistance Fund, a low-key program for contract workers to receive access to Carter Tech's private medical plan and childcare support, originally designed for PR optics. No press releases, no names. He clicked approve, and yet something about it still didn't sit right. Not because it was wrong, but because it felt insufficient. A silent transfer of goodwill from behind glass. And he knew deep down that wasn't what this was about. He wasn't trying to save them. He was trying to understand why he couldn't stop thinking about them. Later that evening, long after the office had cleared out, Evans stood alone by the window again. The lights of the city blinked in the distance. He could see the exact spot where Lily had sat just hours before, legs pulled up under her, the wind curling through her hair. She had looked at him without fear, without expectation. Just the clear-eyed calm of someone who had already learned what it meant to be ignored by the world, and had stopped waiting for it to notice. He sat down, loosened his tie, and poured himself a drink. Not whiskey, tea, unusual. There was a knock at the door. It was Marissa, his executive assistant, loyal, efficient, unshakably professional. "You missed your dinner meeting," she said gently. "I know. You okay?" He hesitated, then shrugged. "Just tired." Marissa narrowed her eyes. "You're never tired." He gave a half smile. "Maybe that's the problem." She left him alone after that. Evan leaned back in his chair, fingers pressed together, staring up at the ceiling. He tried to work, to refocus, but the image came back again. Lily carefully holding the soup spoon, tasting tomato as if it were the first warm thing she'd had in days. And that coat. That damn coat. He closed his laptop, stood up, and reached for his phone. His thumb hovered over the screen. He could call the facilities company. He could ask where Hannah Reeves had worked before, why she was so guarded, why she'd ended up cleaning offices in a skyscraper filled with men in custom suits who wouldn't even notice her passing by. But he didn't. Not yet. Because deep down, he didn't want to report. He wanted a reason to see her again. And so, with nothing left to do, he turned out the lights, walked into the quiet hallway, and stepped into the elevator. As the doors closed, a quiet thought whispered in his mind. Uninvited, but insistent. That wasn't just a girl in a coat. That was the beginning of something I didn't know I needed. And he knew whatever this was, curiosity, guilt, admiration, or something else entirely, it wasn't going away. Not tomorrow. Not ever. 3 days passed. 3 long days in which Evan Blake functioned like a machine on autopilot. He attended meetings, answered investor questions, signed off on major design changes, and even appeared on a live stream panel about sustainable tech infrastructure. On the outside, he was composed, focused, unstoppable, the billionaire CEO the world had come to admire. But inside, something had shifted. His thoughts drifted often, quietly and always in the same direction, toward a little girl in a blue coat, toward a woman who didn't look at him like the world did. The morning of the 4th day, Evan stepped into the elevator of his own office building and caught himself scanning the floor list. His thumb hovered for a second before pressing B1-service level. When the doors opened, the hallway smelled of industrial cleaner and damp tile. It was quieter down here, lit by flickering fluorescent lights and lined with supply closets, maintenance access doors, and break rooms no executive had ever seen. It was a different world, the bones of the tower he ruled from above. He walked past a vending machine humming in the corner, glanced into the break room, and saw 2 janitorial staff drinking coffee and chatting quietly in Spanish. Neither one noticed him. It was strange. No one ever failed to notice Evan Blake. That was the part that felt both refreshing and jarring. He spotted a woman down the hall, rolling a cart of cleaning supplies. His heart jumped. Dark hair pulled back, slender frame in a dark green uniform. It wasn't her. He exhaled. He didn't know whether he was relieved or disappointed. He returned upstairs. He'd been foolish to think he'd just bump into her. Hannah Reeves didn't live in his world. She moved in the background, invisible by design. She had survived by not being seen, but he had seen her, and he wasn't letting go. That night, after most of the staff had left, Evan walked down to the security office. He knew the head of building operations, Marcus, a retired NYPD lieutenant with a deep voice and deeper loyalty. "Can I ask you something off the record?" Evan said. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Of course. There's a woman, one of the night shift cleaners, Hannah Reeves. Do you know when she works next?" Marcus didn't ask why. He just checked the logbook. "She's on rotation Thursday night. Usually starts around 7. Office level 16, North Wing." Evan nodded. "Thanks. You okay, boss?" Evan paused, then gave a quiet, almost reluctant smile. "Just following a feeling." Thursday came like thunder. He spent the entire day trying to ignore the clock, failing miserably. By 6:45 p.m., he had dismissed his assistant early and stood alone in his office, watching the sun dip below the skyline. Manhattan shimmered gold and rose. At 7:03, he stepped out and made his way to the 16th floor. The floor was dim, most lights off, the kind of silence that only came when a space had been emptied of its ambition. No meetings, no noise. Just the hum of electricity and the occasional distant creak of pipes settling. And then, footsteps. He followed the sound around the corner and saw her. Hannah was wiping down a glass wall, headphones in, completely unaware of his presence. Her long hair was tied in a simple braid, a cleaning rag in one hand, a small bucket at her side. She moved with practiced rhythm, not rushed, not slow, but efficient, balanced. He hesitated before speaking, not wanting to startle her. "Hey," he said softly. She turned, surprised, not with fear, but with instant alertness. It took her less than a second to recognize him. "I didn't think billionaires visited their janitorial teams at night," she said, pulling out one headphone, her voice calm and dry. Evan smiled gently. "I was in the neighborhood." She raised an eyebrow. 16 floors up? I needed fresh air." She looked at him for a long moment, arms crossed now, still holding the cloth. "Why are you here, Mr. Blake?" "I wanted to thank you, properly, for letting Lily have lunch with me." "You already did." He stepped closer slowly, not threatening, not demanding, just honest. "I haven't stopped thinking about her, or you." She didn't speak. "I looked you up. I know that sounds intrusive. I didn't dig far, I swear. But I saw your name in the system, and I saw that you're not just a cleaning shift on a spreadsheet." Hannah's gaze sharpened. "What else did you see?" "That you used to work in education, translation services, high level, maybe even government connected." Then, nothing. A drop-off. A void. She turned back toward the glass, started wiping again, her voice quieter now. "My husband died. Lily was 5. I left the world that cost him his life and found one that couldn't take anything else from me." Evan's chest tightened. "I'm sorry." "No offense," she said, still not looking at him. "But I don't need your sorry. I need to feed my kid. Keep her safe. That's why I'm here. Because this job, this silence, lets me do that without being noticed." "And yet," Evan said softly, "you were noticed." That made her pause. She looked at him then. Really looked. "You're not here to make a charitable gesture, are you?" "No," he said. "I'm here because I don't want this to be over." She studied him, her blue eyes unreadable. "I don't know what you think you're getting into," she said, "but my life isn't a movie. It doesn't come with happy endings or polished soundtracks. It's messy, it's painful, and most of the time, it's exhausting." Evan nodded. "I didn't come for a fairy tale. I came because I met a little girl in a blue coat who reminded me what it feels like to care about something real." For the first time, something shifted in Hannah's eyes. Not softening, not yet, but curiosity, a flicker of something unspoken. She set the cloth down and stepped back. "You hungry?" she asked. He blinked. "What?" "I get a break in 20 minutes. There's a diner 2 blocks from here. You want to talk?" "You do it over eggs and bad coffee." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I'll be there." "Don't wear a $3,000 coat," she added as she picked up her bucket. "They charge extra for guys who look like walking stock portfolios." He laughed. And for the first time in weeks, maybe months, it felt real. Not performative, not strategic, just real. He stood there for a moment after she disappeared around the corner, listening to the quiet buzz of the building. His heart was beating faster than it should have been. He wasn't sure where this was going, but he knew one thing with absolute clarity. He wanted to find out. The diner wasn't glamorous. It sat on a quiet corner 2 blocks from the Carter Tech Tower, tucked between a dry cleaner and a florist that had long since closed down. A neon sign buzzed overhead, flickering between open and a weak, half-lit pen. Inside, the air smelled like old coffee, grilled cheese, and familiarity. Evan arrived 10 minutes early. He took a booth in the back, the kind of booth where the vinyl stuck a little to your coat and the table wobbled just enough to annoy you. He didn't mind. In fact, he welcomed it. There was something disarming about this place. Honest. Real. He wore a dark hoodie and jeans, simple enough that he passed as just another late-night customer, though the way he held himself still gave him away. His phone buzzed on the table, but he didn't touch it. Instead, he stirred the sugar into his coffee and waited, fingers tapping the side of the cup. At exactly 7:42, the bell over the door rang. Hannah walked in wearing the same work uniform, her hair now out of the braid and falling in loose waves over her shoulders. She looked tired. Not the dramatic kind of exhaustion, but the quiet, lived-in weariness of someone who never really rests. Still, she carried herself with a certain kind of grace, the kind that made even the diner's dim yellow lighting seem softer when she stepped beneath it. She slid into the booth across from him without hesitation. "You made it," he said. "You're not wearing the coat." "I took your advice." She cracked a small smile and picked up the laminated menu, flipping it open with the casual precision of someone who'd eaten here many times before. "They have good pancakes," she said, "even at night." "I'll take your word for it." They both ordered, pancakes and eggs for her, black coffee and a grilled cheese for him. No wine list, no truffle oil, just warm food and silence, thick with anticipation. Finally, she spoke. "Why are you really here, Evan?" Her tone wasn't defensive. It was curious, tired but genuine. She wasn't accusing him. She was inviting him to be honest. He met her gaze. "Because I can't stop thinking about you." Or Lily. "That still doesn't explain it. I've spent my life building things. Companies, teams, futures. But lately it's all felt hollow. Like I've been pouring gold into something with a crack in the bottom. And then I met your daughter, and something in me stopped." She looked down at her napkin, picked at the edge. "She's stronger than she looks. She reminds me of someone." Hannah looked up. "Me?" Evan nodded. "You hide it well, but you carry the weight of every room you walk into." She took a sip of coffee, her expression unreadable. "I wasn't always like this," she said. "Before Lily, I worked for a government translation agency. My specialty was conflict zones, languages with multiple dialects, fractured meanings. I could sit between two people who hated each other and get them to understand. Not agree, but understand. That's rare. It was dangerous. And then it got worse." Evan listened, his expression softening. "My husband was a security contractor. He was hired through a private firm that worked under a government shell. On paper, he was in logistics. In reality, he was collecting data on illegal money flows. One day he didn't come home. The next, I got a knock at the door. No body, no answers, just a file with half the pages blacked out." Evan's throat tightened. "I'm so sorry. I fought it, asked questions, filed reports. And then the threat started. Quiet, cold, effective. I lost my job. Our bank accounts were flagged for suspicious activity. I pulled Lily out of daycare and disappeared. Found jobs where no one looked twice at me. Started over." She paused. "And that's how I ended up cleaning your conference rooms." Evan was silent. He didn't look away. "I've seen bad people," he said quietly. "But what they did to you, that's beyond cruelty. That's erasure." Hannah laughed once, bitter and quiet. "That's exactly what it was. They didn't just want to silence me. They wanted to make me invisible. But you're not," he said. "Not to me." She looked at him for a long time. In her eyes, something was shifting. Not trust yet, but the cautious opening of a door she'd kept locked for years. "Lily thinks you're a movie star," she said finally. "She said you smell like a rich guy in a Christmas commercial." Evan laughed, a real laugh, full and unexpected. "I'll take that as a compliment." "She also said you look sad." He blinked. "Did she?" "She's a strange kid. Not afraid of anything, but somehow always expecting the worst. She's observant. She's had to be." The food arrived then, and for a while they just ate. No pressure, no performances. Just two people in a booth, sharing something warm. After a few minutes, Evan said, "I don't want to just drop in and disappear, Hannah. I want to help, not fix, not save, just be there, if you'll let me." She didn't answer right away. "People like you don't usually stay," she said. "People like me don't usually get the chance." That made her go quiet. She pushed her empty plate away and leaned back. "You want to help?" she asked. "Okay, but on one condition." "Name it." "You treat Lily like a human being. Not a miracle. Not a broken child. Just a kid who deserves peace." He nodded, eyes steady. "I swear." She stood and pulled a few crumpled bills from her pocket for the tip. He tried to stop her. She waved him off. "I earn my own way." "I never doubted that." They stepped outside together. The city had quieted, lights glowing low across the rooftops. She zipped up her coat. He slid his hands into his pockets. "I'll walk you to the subway," he said. "I take the bus." "Then I'll walk you to the bus." she smiled finally. Something real, something soft. All right then. And as they walked down the sidewalk, side by side, something began to take shape between them. Not a romance, not yet, but a possibility. A flicker of warmth in a world that had once tried to turn both of them cold. And neither of them said it, but both felt it. Something was beginning, and it would not be small. It started with a knock at the door. Not the dramatic kind, not pounding or violent, just a soft, rhythmic knock. The kind you might hear from a neighbor borrowing sugar. But it came at 2:17 a.m. Evan shot upright in bed, adrenaline jolting him from a deep, dreamless sleep. His penthouse was usually silent at night, the city reduced to a low hum beyond the double-glazed windows. But this wasn't part of the world he had built. He grabbed his phone and checked the camera feed from the front hallway. No one. Then the screen flickered, glitched for half a second, and rebooted. A chill ran through him. The system was top-tier, military-grade. The same surveillance software used by global security firms. It didn't glitch. Not unless someone made it. He was halfway across the room when his phone buzzed. A text. She should have stayed invisible. No sender, no number, just the message. He stared at it, heart thudding. And then, without hesitation, he picked up his coat, threw on shoes, and ran to the elevator. 10 minutes later, he was pounding on Hannah's apartment door. It was a modest walk-up, second floor, just outside Brooklyn Heights, a quiet neighborhood. Too quiet tonight. The door opened and Hannah stood there in sweatpants and a faded hoodie, hair pulled up, eyes alert. Not frightened, but already bracing. "I didn't expect to see you at 2 a.m., she said. "We need to talk," he said, stepping inside before she could ask. She closed the door behind him, locking it quickly and quietly. Lily was asleep in the next room, the nightlight casting a soft blue glow under the door. Evan lowered his voice. "I got a message. Someone bypassed my system. They knew where I live. And they knew about you." Hannah didn't react right away. She sat down slowly at the edge of the couch, rubbing her hands together, processing. "What did it say?" she asked. He showed her the phone. She read the text in silence, then looked up at him, eyes clear. "I knew this would happen," she said. "You knew someone was watching?" "I knew the past doesn't just stay buried. I knew the second I opened my mouth to you, something would stir." Evan sat down across from her, elbows on his knees. "Then tell me everything. No filters, no half stories. I can't help you if I don't know the whole picture." She hesitated, then nodded. "My husband's name was Eric Reeves. 3 years ago, he was hired to audit security clearances for a private firm contracted by the Department of Energy. On paper, it was logistics. In reality, it was black budget surveillance, internal leaks, off-the-books weapons transfers. Nothing with fingerprints, nothing with oversight." Evan's face hardened. "He found something?" "He didn't tell me exactly, just said it was big. Too big. He was scared. I'd never seen him scared before." She looked away for a moment, then back. "One day he went to a meeting, said he had files, said he'd back up everything before turning it in. That was the last time I saw him." "No body?" Evan asked. "No funeral. Just a call from someone who claimed to be his handler. Said it was a car accident in Arizona. But the coroner's report never existed. The car? Never recovered. And the bank accounts? Frozen 2 days later. I was locked out of everything." Her voice was calm, but beneath the surface was a tight wire of grief and fury. Then came the warnings, emails, unmarked cars outside the house, the phone calls where no one spoke. It wasn't loud. It wasn't cinematic. It was precise. And it was terrifying. Evan sat back, shaking his head. "Jesus. I ran, changed our names, took jobs that wouldn't draw attention, disappeared. That's why Lily never went to public school again. That's why I cleaned floors, because it was safe." He stood and began to pace. "I thought this was about me. I thought someone was trying to hurt me, to weaken my name, drag me into a scandal. But this isn't about Carter Tech. This is about you." She nodded. "And now it's about both of us." He turned to face her, his expression sharper now. Not angry, but resolute. "I have people. Not the kind that vanish problems, the kind that reveal them. I want to go after whoever did this. Not quietly, publicly. I want to bring the whole thing into daylight where they can't hide. Her eyes widened. Evan, I know the risk, but I'm not going to let them threaten you. Or Lily. You've spent too long running. You deserve to stop. Hannah stood slowly, folding her arms. You think the world will believe me? A janitor? A ghost? They'll believe me, Evan said, and I'll make them listen to you. There was a long silence between them. Then she exhaled, a deep, heavy breath. If you do this, there's no going back. I don't want to go back, he said. I want to end this. She nodded once. Then we do it together. But we do it smart. We gather proof. We find the trail. We don't shout until the fire is ready. Evan looked at her, really looked. And for the first time, he saw her not just as a survivor or a mother or even a woman he admired. He saw her as a partner, a force, a fuse. He reached for her hand. She let him. And together in the dim light of a small Brooklyn apartment, they began to plan a war, not of bullets, but of truth, of exposure. Because some ghosts don't vanish on their own. Sometimes you have to drag them into the light. The truth didn't explode. It seeped. It crept into boardrooms and server rooms, whispered its way through encrypted emails, passed silently between journalists and whistleblowers. Hannah and Evan didn't light a fire overnight. They lit match after match, carefully, deliberately, until the flame finally caught. It started with a name. Hannah remembered it from a file her husband had shown her once, back when things were still normal. A middleman with government clearance and private investments in a tech firm based in Northern Virginia. A ghost of a man, scrubbed clean from search engines. His name tied only to shell companies and private security consultants. Evan handed it to a former intelligence contact he trusted, someone who owed him favors from another lifetime. What came back confirmed everything. Eric Reeves had been on the verge of exposing a network of illegal surveillance programs tied to privatized data harvesting contracts. Not just domestic, global. The funding had passed through layers of companies, some of which had direct ties to major government officials. And at least 2 of those companies had been acquired or absorbed into investment portfolios currently held by Carter Tech competitors. Specifically, Gravemont Systems, a security tech giant whose CEO had quietly tried to buy out one of Evan's patents 6 months earlier. Evan stared at the documents on his desk. Emails, bank statements, silent transactions. The sheer scale of it. Blackmail, bribes, kill orders disguised as disappearances. It was bigger than either of them imagined. And now they were targets. The threats escalated, not in volume, in precision. One night, Evan's car alarm went off at 3:12 a.m. The windshield had a single word scratched across the glass. Enough. Another day, Hannah received a package at her apartment. No return address. Inside, an old photograph of her and Eric. The corner burned, the back scrawled with her daughter's name. She didn't cry. She didn't even flinch. She took the photo, ripped it in half, and placed it in a fireproof folder labeled Evidence. They worked in silence most nights, after Lily went to bed. Hannah pulled up what little she had archived over the years. Handwritten notes, copies of documents Eric had trusted her with. Evan ran it through Carter Tech's AI parsing tools, reconstructing shredded timelines and broken metadata. The pieces began to form a map, one they could follow all the way back to Gravemont, and that's when they made the decision. They weren't going to send the story to a newspaper. That could be killed, delayed, legally strangled in court. They would go directly to the public, full transparency. Evan had an idea. He knew a woman named Natalie Kent, a fiercely independent documentary journalist who had spent the last decade chasing buried corruption across 3 continents. She was skeptical by default, fearless by nature, and impossible to bribe. When he called her, her voice was dry but intrigued. I didn't think someone like you would risk everything for someone like her, she said. I didn't think I'd have to, Evan replied. But here we are. They met in secret, in a soundproof office on the lowest level of Carter Tech's secondary building, cameras disabled, guards handpicked. Hannah told her everything, not just fact, the story, how she met Eric, what he discovered, the night he disappeared, the years of hiding, the silence. Natalie didn't speak for a full minute when it was over. Then she simply said, "Let's burn them down." It took 2 weeks. Natalie and her team filmed interviews with Hannah and Evan in shadow, ran fact checks, vetted every line of data, and verified each thread until it couldn't be denied. No dramatics, no exaggeration, just cold, damning truth. And then on a Friday morning, just after 10 a.m., the film dropped. A 37-minute documentary titled Invisible Clearance, the story they tried to erase. It spread like wildfire. Within hours, it was on the front page of every major outlet. New York Times, BBC, Le Monde. View counts soared into the millions. Hashtags trended worldwide. Whistleblowers began coming forward. A class action suit was filed against Gravemont by a coalition of former contractors. Congress announced a formal inquiry, but none of that mattered as much as one thing. Eric Reeves's name was no longer missing. He was no longer just a ghost. He was a man, a husband, a father, a truth teller. And finally, someone was listening. That night, Evan and Hannah sat on the floor of her apartment, laptop open between them as notifications rolled in like waves. Articles, donations, messages, stories from other widows, other survivors. Hannah didn't smile. She cried, not loudly, not messily. Just tears running down her face, steady and silent. Years of grief finally finding a place to land. Evan sat beside her, unsure whether to speak. But he didn't have to. She leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder, her fingers curling lightly into the fabric of his sleeve. "You did it," he whispered. "No," she said. "We did." In the other room, Lily stirred, and the nightlight glowed quietly. There were still threats, still risk. The machine they'd exposed wouldn't go down easily, but the silence was broken. And that meant everything. The storm had passed, but the air still carried the scent of it. The weeks after the documentary aired were a blur of headlines, subpoenas, public statements, and televised hearings. Gravemont systems collapsed from within. Executives resigned, one after another, many of them dragged into federal court. Old alliances turned to ash. Investigations spiraled outward, touching agencies and firms across the country. The machine that had swallowed Eric Reeves was finally being dismantled, piece by piece. And through it all, Hannah Reeves, the woman no one had seen coming, held her ground. She didn't seek the spotlight, didn't bask in the attention. When reporters tried to frame her as a heroine, she refused the title. "I didn't want to be brave," she said once in a quiet interview. "I just wanted to be safe." Evan never left her side. He turned down interviews. He pulled back from public appearances. He let others lead the investor calls. For once, the company could survive without him being its face. And that was exactly how he wanted it. His life had shifted course, veering off the high-speed freeway of corporate dominance and onto a quieter road. Unlined with messy breakfasts, silent cups of coffee, laughter from a small voice that now echoed through his apartment like sunlight through open blinds. Because Hannah and Lily had moved in. Not all at once. There had been hesitation, conversations, boundaries. They didn't call it anything. Not at first. It wasn't about titles. It was about presence, about showing up. One day, Lily came home from school and tossed her backpack on the kitchen floor. She marched up to Evan, hands on her hips. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." She squinted at him, suspicious. "Are you living with us, or are we living with you?" He paused, then smiled. "I think we're all just living together." She nodded slowly. "Okay, that works." Hannah had laughed for a long time after that. Their days found rhythm, slow, unglamorous rhythm. Mornings were filled with cereal spills and lost socks and last-minute lunch packing. Evenings brought board games and takeout boxes, and on Fridays, Lily would demand family movie night, complete with commentary, popcorn, and strict no-phone rules. Evan complied every time, and somewhere in the middle of it all, Evan found something he didn't realize he'd been missing. Stillness. Not boredom, not stagnation. Just the kind of peace that came from being surrounded by people who knew your whole story and didn't want anything from you except truth. It was one Saturday morning, gray, rainy, and unremarkable, when it happened. They were in the kitchen. Hannah was barefoot, wearing one of Evan's old t-shirts and making pancakes. Lily was drawing superheroes on a notepad, inventing elaborate names and backstories as she went. Evan sipped his coffee, leaning against the counter, watching them both with a quiet smile. And then like a whisper in his chest, he knew. He didn't want to go back to how it was before, not to the silence, not to the loneliness disguised as ambition, not to the penthouse full of awards and empty spaces. He didn't need a press release. He needed a life. "Marry me," he said suddenly. Hannah froze, pancake spatula hovering in midair. Lily gasped. "Oh my God, he did it like that." Evan blinked. "Wait, I didn't mean, I did mean it. I didn't plan to." Hannah turned slowly, her expression unreadable. "You're asking me to marry you, in the kitchen, while I'm wearing your shirt, with batter on my arm." He nodded. "Yes, I think I am." She studied him for a long moment. Then she smiled. That slow, private, radiant smile he'd grown to love more than anything else in the world. "Okay," Lily screamed. "Wait, does this mean I get to be the flower girl?" Evan laughed, breathless, disbelieving, overwhelmed. Hannah walked over to him, pancake forgotten, and pressed her forehead to his. "You really weren't going to do anything fancy?" she whispered. "I thought about it," he admitted. "But then I realized, you're not the type who needs fireworks. You just need honesty." "I'll take that." They stood like that for a long time, arms around each other, the city quiet behind the rain-speckled windows. Later that night, Lily drew a new comic. The superhero wore a janitor's uniform and carried a mop like a staff. She had blue eyes and a secret past and could walk through fire without burning. Her sidekick wore a suit, but he wasn't rich because of money. He was rich because he chose to protect the truth. She titled it, "The Ones Who Stayed." And in the final panel, they stood together. A woman who had once disappeared, a man who had once been unreachable, and the girl who had brought them back to life. No explosions, no superpowers, just love. Found, not in grand gestures, but in a single question, asked without expectation. "Would you like some lunch?" And that was all it took. This is not a story about wealth. It's a story about worth. It begins with a billionaire and a janitor, two people from opposite worlds divided by power, class, and circumstance. And yet, the deeper the story goes, the more those differences dissolve. What's left isn't money, status, or appearance. What's left is what they chose to see in each other: truth, strength, vulnerability, and ultimately, love. What I love most about this ending is its simplicity. No grand speeches, no slow-motion rescues, just quiet persistence. A man who finally paused long enough to notice someone else. A woman who had every reason to close off, but still allowed herself to hope again. And a little girl who, without meaning to, became the thread that stitched two broken lives together. It's powerful because it feels earned. They didn't fall into each other's arms after chapter 1. They built trust, brick by brick, through fear, doubt, and truth. And in doing so, they created something far more resilient than a romance. They created a family. Not the kind that appears in fairy tales, the kind that survives the real world. And in the end, that's what makes this story unforgettable. Not that a billionaire fell in love with a janitor, but that a man opened his heart and a woman dared to believe she was worth being seen. And that sometimes is all it takes to change everything.